the Philosopher's Poet. I have a very special guest with me this evening. You want to do your own intro, Melissa? Yeah,
Oh my God. Hi, I'm Melissa. I'm a poet, and that's all I can say, I guess.
man, I'll just say for everyone else that that's quite a like underplay. Like, obviously I follow you, Melissa, and I would say you're more than just a poet, but I would say, I guess if you depends how you define a poet. If a poet's someone who speaks on life experience, who speaks on self-expression, then you are, but not every poet can do that or does it. So yeah, that's yeah, and someone with a clear purpose and message. So I would say, yeah, not all poets can do that, not all poets do it. So I would say, yeah, so yeah, on my take.
I think, yeah, I think I get what you're saying. I think for me, I'm making everything up as I go along. I didn't study literature. I didn't study anything like this. It's all just me trying to articulate what's going on in my brain. And for me, things make more sense when they rhyme.
Hmm.
Um, so that I feel like I've got imposter syndrome in the first place, even saying I'm a poet.
What?
Um,
That is a
so
very interesting thought you just said there about imposter syndrome. I don't have a degree in English literature, or anything like that. I don't have a formal education in writing. But I think I approached it first as therapy and just writing down. So I would say I'm a big advocate for people just writing down how they feel first and then finding some sort of structure to it. Um,
yeah. Yeah, I completely agree. I think that's how it kind of started. Before I wrote poetry, I've always had done journals and stuff like that and diaries even from being like 10 years old or something. So I've always sort of wrote my thoughts down, and it's only like more recently things have become more poetic, and I think that's just comes along with like the music I listen to and things like that. I used to be really big on rap and stuff when I was younger. Um and rap isn't that far off poetry really, is it? So
Not
the
really.
things have just sort of merged together, and I'm just kind of doing what I'm doing now. Still making it up as I go along, still don't understand any of the lingo or any of the jargon. Because that's the other thing, is like sometimes I go to poetry nights and I have people introduce the works, and they'll say, oh, it's this stanza and this rhyming thing and X, Y, and Z. And I have no idea what they're on about. It just goes way over my head. Like, I don't have any structure or anything. It's literally me just trying to articulate my thoughts, and like the rhymes will just change the direction of the flow as it goes along. But I think that's where the imposter syndrome comes from, because I just don't have that education or understanding. And I also don't care to learn either.
Fair
I don't know if that just makes me sound arrogant, but stuff like that goes over my brain, and I don't want something else to try and influence what I'm doing. I feel like to be me authentically, I've got to just let it happen outwards rather than absorb the other things and let that influence me.
Yeah. Okay. I completely understand where you're coming from. I had this idea of, I guess you could call it soul writing, where you kind of express yourself first, and then you kind of infuse the words with your own emotions and spirit. And sometimes I think people forget that two people can write the same thing or say the same thing, but you can get something out of one thing and less out of another. Because I feel like
Mm-hmm.
they're almost like, as words are like a form of language, they also act as a container for our feelings. So I kind of feel like you can tell more often than not what sort of the feel, the power behind someone's words, regardless of how technical they are with their writing, or you know what structure they use. As I said, I think it does help, and I think we do a lot of these things intuitively until we're told
Mm.
something, we're using couplets or whatever. But I think first and foremost, it's how you feel, and when you write it down, and then you can refine your craft. So yeah, I get it totally. Like, as I said, I'm not an academic myself in the writing field. I pick up a few things here and there, but my purpose for writing isn't an academic task either. It's like, I'm trying to express something and give something. I think you're doing the same. You're giving people something, as well as giving something to yourself.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that's it, isn't it? So like it's more like, and I hate to sound cliche, it's kind of like the tortured soul sort of thing, always turn to like the more artistic and creative endeavors. So you've obviously got things like poets, but you've got art and other writers and all these sort of things. And it's kind of like, what other release do you have apart from trying to put pen to paper or paintbrush to paper or something like that? And everything is so like personal to that person. So even like, do you know, I don't do many because I tend to get up too wrapped up in my own brain to start with, but I have responded to a few of like poetry prompts and stuff like that. And it absolutely blows my mind how one word or a couple of words can get such different responses from other people and where your brain goes with that. And I've felt the same thing as well. Like I've done a few poetry nights and people will come up and they'll read about something that's going on in their lives, or they'll do like short stories, or and it just absolutely blows my mind. So it's like, where is your brain going? Like, where does your brain go when you're not just like doing your 9 to 5 or making tea or doing all these other things? And how different it is from where mine is. But then it's also how far I can go in the different places as well. Do you know what I mean? Because we're all
Mm.
so eclectic. We've all got different experiences and things like that. But the purpose of it all, and like the one thing we all had in common when we went to these sort of poetry nights, is that writing was the release, that's the healing that you're getting from it. And that's what you need from it, is to heal and obviously make sense of things by writing it down. But yeah, there's just something really beautiful about that sort of atmosphere, that everybody feels the need to do these things, obviously for very different reasons, and the peace it can bring other people as well. From sort of articulating sort of feelings and emotions that they couldn't necessarily put into words themselves at that stage, or they hadn't got around to yet, or something like that. But yeah, it absolutely blows my mind just like how you can hear one word and it's like, where does your brain go with that?
Yeah, I feel like with a lot, not everyone, a lot of people you meet in the writing community, you're able to express things that you couldn't necessarily express even with friends and family. In that way, a lot of the people you meet in sort of that community is almost a bit of a soul tribe.
Oh.
Not saying about everyone, but a lot of people who come across, because people are willing to be vulnerable, and
Mm.
they come from all walks of life and they have different experiences. But I think the root of our experiences come from the same thing. They come from a fear, self-acceptance, self-love, and they
Mm.
come from understanding who you are and trauma. So the root of those experiences
Mm.
is the same, even if the experiences are different.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying, and like just when you're saying then like the vulnerability thing, I completely agree with it and I get on board with it. But the same sort of speak, that non-writers would have about us, I also have about them as well, because it's everything's strengths and weaknesses, isn't it? Everybody can do something a little bit better or a little bit worse than the next person. And I really envy people who can just like get up and go about the day and do the things in the structure that you're supposed to do. Do you know what I mean? Like my house is so chaotic, my brain's so chaotic, my work's so chaotic. Like I really struggle to get that sort of structure, but I can structure some words.
Mm.
So in the same way that people would sort of read our stuff or listen to our stuff and be like, oh my God, that's really cool, I wish I could do that, I also have the same feeling about just being able to do the washing up and make my tea and like just do things like everybody else does. I don't feel like I can do that, but I can do something that they'd also find quite admirable as well. So, but it all comes down to like coping mechanisms and stuff like that. I know like a lot of people find like living in a clean environment and being on top of that sort of stuff, that's sort of their control. If they're not having control or feeling like they have control of other things going on in their life, like controlling the environment is a huge thing.
Mm.
And I had that to a certain extent, but it's more like a creative sense, like I'll just paint something a wacky colour. I can't just like clean up and like do things like function like I feel like a lot of other people do. My therapist will listen to this now. She'll be like, oh, you've been so hard on yourself. But it literally is just that. I think it's just how the trauma manifests itself and your own coping mechanism with it.
Mm.
Um, for me, I've always had like a really intense like inner monologue in my brain. Like I'll always talk to myself, and I've done for as long as I can remember. So I think that's just like manifested it that way. But other people, obviously, if they haven't been so insular, they can just sort of do actions and do the X, Y, and Z, step one, two, and three. But I just can't do that.
I mean, I would class myself as a high functioning workaholic, which means that I, I've built up enough tools to get through the day at work. But then, to be honest, outside of work, I can start off being organized and it all collapses in a few days.
Oh, I try. I go through phases. I really do. So I'll have like a few days where if my brain's quite clear, it's like, oh, I can do this, I can clean this. But I just get so distracted by stuff and like everything's always a step forward. It's always like two steps forward, one step back. But actually just like following an action through is just crazy to me. Absolutely crazy to me. I wish I could, but it's just I can't force something that I'm not made that way. Do you know what I mean? It's expectations on yourself, isn't it? I can't compare myself to other people when they haven't lived my life and vice versa.
Yeah, yeah, I mean that is true. I think like on a grander scale, the world needs people who are very practical, and the world needs idealists and the people in between, like to function. Like they need
Mm,
people who can think up a dream, but then struggle with like kind of the nuts and bolts, and then people who are engineers but struggle to conceive of a vision. I guess if you kind of and that's okay. Like we need both, and it's good that we have such diversity in people. More so if they're compassionate and loving because they will love people for who they are in any form of relationship and then
mm.
qualities whilst helping you build up enough that you can function in the nuts and bolts whilst you give them a glimpse of the vision that they're trying to unfold for themselves.
Yeah, I completely agree. And that's something I've had to get comfortable with quite recently. I feel like for quite a long time, I went into this like hyper independent state where I'd try and cover everything and like be able to do everything by myself. And it's only recently where I'm actually like normally say you're not like superwoman or whoever you're trying to be. There is strengths and weaknesses. There are things that you can't do, and stop expecting that from yourself and let somebody else in to help you. Because obviously I bring value to them. The things that they can't do, I can do, and it's just working towards strengths and weaknesses sort of thing. But it's quite a new like a revolutionary concept for me to be like, no, you don't have to be able to do everything. But yeah, yeah, it's hard work. Like stepping back, it's a bit like swallowing your pride a little bit and take some humble pie. But it's just accepting like what way out I am and like be see the value in my own strengths, because obviously when you are inherently or you work really hard to be good at something, you don't necessarily see the value in that if it's starting to become second nature, when actually somebody who doesn't have that ability would again be quite in awe of that. And it's like, and again, I'm saying speaking so highly, people who can just get stuff done and everything like that. So why can't I transfer my perception of other people onto myself and accept that actually, yeah, everything is give and take rather than me just trying to give and
Yeah.
give.
Yeah. um, I think I learned at a younger age that, and it was hard for me to take that especially in the work environment when I was younger, I had this thing where if something really didn't interest me, it just took me an immense amount of effort to actually do it. So I just put it off.
I just don't do it. I
Yeah,
just don't do it. I think one of even I'm like talking about things that are quite new to me. It like a lot of this it like is quite new to me. Um, but like understanding my own needs and all that sort of stuff. And so I kind of went through a phase where I had no free will, I had no freedom. Everything was sort of dependent on another person, or my life was controlled by another person. So to wake up one morning and then I could just do what I wanted and not be on eggshells and not be like running around catering to another person. So I kind of went from having no free will to and freedom to all the freedom in the world. So I got so rather than being so hard on myself, I was so kind on myself now as well. And
mm,
because I've been through like such like horrible events and stuff like that, I'm so soft on myself. So to me, to force myself to do something like you're saying that you could do, I can't. I just can't. I just like no. I'm like, oh, you've had a bad day. Treat yourself, Melissa. Like it's just very much like giving myself the kindness that I've never done before.
Yeah.
I've always been so strict on myself. Like I just don't have that almost like discipline um that I once did. And like everything's like an extreme. Like I'll go from one extreme to the other and then I'll try to find something in the middle that actually like not only resonates with me, reflects with me, but also is a functioning level of okay, because I can't function very well here, I can't function very well here. I need to find something that actually makes sense in the middle. But discipline is just not something that I've got
Mm.
comfortable with again. I'm just too kind on myself, and I don't think there's an issue there's not necessarily an issue with that. I need to be nice to myself. It is just like, no, come on, Lizzie, you actually need to get some stuff done sometimes. Um, but I'll get there. I'll get there.
Yeah, I believe you will. I mean, you said you had no control, or now I've had my own past experiences with having no control or someone trying to take or have control over me.
Mm.
But I just want to hear more about this in terms of why you had no control. What was and don't if you don't have to share everything, but that's just quite an interesting statement. Was that linked to like a relationship, and that can be either like a family or partner or
Yeah. So like I had like a few like I had a nice upbringing, don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to take away from that, but there were like dynamics and all that sort of jazz. So I'd very much just try and control what I could control. So that was my eating for a lot of it. I had really bad disordered eating when I was younger, and that was all about control. And then things just sort of spiraled and spiraled and spiraled, and I got myself in a few like toxic relationships. And then my last one was really severe domestic abuse. So I had like no control at all. Like I had no free will. I just couldn't. All of my life just depended on keeping another person happy, and not even keeping them happy. Just don't give them any ammunition to start shouting at me, basically. Um, so that's where the control thing comes out of. Like I didn't have any autonomy. I didn't have any free will. It was just, what can I do to make this day a little bit easier? So obviously when the day came and they weren't in my house anymore, and it was just like, oh my God, like I can move and I'm not going to get shouted at. Like I can't hear this person in the house. Like it was just absolutely broke my brain that first day when I couldn't like hear everything. Like it gets like all your senses, like you can't hear them, smell them, all these sort of things, and I could just do what I wanted to do, and it was just absolutely mind blowing. Do you know what I mean? So yeah, then he was kind of, well, what do I do with all this newfound freedom? I've never had this in my life. Um, so yeah, I'm getting comfy with it now. I'm 2 years and 3 months out of the situation, so I am getting used to it. But I still do find it really weird. So even I go swimming quite a lot, and it's just my little way of like recollecting my thoughts and not thinking about stuff as well. And it was last week, I'd just gone swimming after work. I'd got in the car and I had this really crazy like depersonalization hit me. It happens sometimes, and I'm just like, this is so weird. Like I can just get in the car and do this thing and then drive home and do the next thing. And I know it just sounds so normal, but it just feels so not real as well at the same time. And I've struggled with that ever since I was a little kid, the depersonalization stuff and seeing things in the third person. But yeah, I do still struggle with the free will and how much everything feels like a novelty, and how childlike I feel sometimes just for doing something that is so second nature to other people, I guess.
I think I mean I'm sorry you went through that. Often in life I think a lot of people and I could be wrong here. It's like when people come across someone who's quite I'm going to say emotionally in tune with themselves, or someone who's quite giving, and unfortunately other people can come along and take advantage of that, and just
Mm.
take and then you almost become like some sort of sacrificial lamb because it's all about them. Um and so I'm really glad that you managed to come out of that, and I understand, we're all still recovering from something, and
Mm.
um and I kind of it's given me some more context about sort of um at least in part about why you write. And I feel like from reading a few of your pieces and even a lot of your spoken word on TikTok, I would say that there's something quite empowering about what you do and what you say. And it can be quite personal to you, but equally, I think it can be personal to others in the sense of when they've had to reclaim their power and they've had to start this here their own like hero's journey again after like rebuild themselves. So I really admire you for that. And that's yeah, I would say yeah,
Yeah, I get what you're saying. It's like it's finding my voice. I think that's
yeah,
the biggest thing here is that I'm 28 now, and even before all this, like the bad relationship happened, like I've never felt empowered to use my own voice or anything like that. So that's kind of where a lot of the ammunition and motivation comes from, I suppose, is that I'm overcompensating now for all the time I didn't have one, and then especially not having a voice in that relationship. So it's and again, I'm being on this way and I'm overcompensating over here, and I'll find something in the middle that I feel like reflects future Melissa. But that is the main thing of it, is like finding my voice and saying the things that I wanted to say and healing through that way. Because obviously I'm not in contact with this person,
mm,
made it very, very clear never to get in contact with me again. But one of the ways I'm healing through it is, again, this little monologue I have in my head. Like, I'm trying to get in their brain sometimes of like why they did what they did and all this sort of stuff. So some of my pieces are like talking back to them, asking them these sort of questions, and like obviously I'm never going to reach out and ask it in person, and I don't want to know what they say, because I think I could figure that out already. But it does help me get things off my chest and move forward. Like, I obviously need to acknowledge the emotion or acknowledge the feeling or the questions that I've got, and this is my closure of that thing without actually opening the door again to
mm,
directly to that person, I guess. But it has been a massive thing, like especially at the beginning, I was quite severely in denial about what happened. I didn't have people around me that validated me. Like, the people around me kind of took my abuser's side, and I didn't tell my family what had happened because I didn't want to hurt their feelings. So poetry just felt like the natural outcome for me to get these things out of my system and start acknowledging them without getting other people involved, I guess.
yeah,
And I can imagine other people have experienced similar. Like, don't really have much of a following or anything like that, but when I get somebody saying like, oh, they resonate with what I'm saying, or like they get it and whatever, I feel like I am bringing somebody else a little bit of peace with my words, and that means the world to me.
yeah,
Um, but yeah, it's tough and it's sad as well. Like, I think I felt quite isolated through a lot of this, and I kind of felt like my life isn't real. Like, even when I've said I see things in the third person, all that sort of stuff. So I'm literally like, in my brain a lot of the time I'm seeing things up here, and then like this is going on here. So being open about this and somebody saying like, oh, they get it, or like they went through a similar experience, or even just like saying like, oh, it's really shit that you went through that or whatever, it's all validating me and humanizing what I've been through, because obviously I've spent such a long time feeling like a bit of an alien.
mm,
um and for somebody to like humanize me and be like, no, I've had a similar experience, and like you can move forward and things like that. It just helps bring me back into the first person sometimes.
yeah,
um I still have spend a lot of time in the third person, but being present is quite a new concept for me. And I'm still only just getting to grips with it. There's like I don't think I've wrote a piece on this, but I've talked quite openly about like there was this one turning point. I think it was about September or something last year, and because the abuse that I've suffered, I'm pretty sure I've got like PTSD. I've got all the symptoms for it. So I have get like the flashbacks, triggers, panic attacks, nightmares, all this sort of jazz. So I'm constantly thinking when I'm interacting with other people what everything means. It's not just like me being with another person, spending time with them. It's what does this mean and what could they do, or why isn't this happening? But there was a time last year that I've been getting close to somebody, and we were in a car and there was music on and the sun was shining, and I just like started crying a little bit, and I had this massive smile on my face because for the first time in nearly 2 years, I felt like I was just part of what was going on. I was seeing things from their perspective and in the first person, and it just like broke my heart in a little bit because I remember going to therapy on the Monday and telling about it, and I just cried and I cried and I cried because I just hadn't been part of what other people had been part of for such a long amount of time. Um, it just blew my mind. I was always thinking about the Strudwood Orchid. And I've got like quite a lot of like monumental things that happened like along the journey that sort of changed the trajectory of where I was going with things or caught me off guard, like all these triggers and even glimmers. But yeah, that was like quite a big one, was just like actually being present and part of what was going on, just blew my mind.
I feel like because the way you said that, it's almost as if you pick up on others' emotions when you're in the first person. It's almost like you're quite like empathic, like I would say, despite because it would be, I guess, it would be easy for someone to just completely close off. And I guess you're saying when you're in the third person, I guess that is a form of sort of diffusing that. But I feel like it sounds like you're very emotionally sensitive, and that's not a negative thing. It's that's you can, let's say, not read the room, but you can feel things. Um,
Yeah, I've always been really, really hypersensitive. And I can put it down to like this one really specific thing that happened when I was like 5 years old. Like I won't get into it or anything like that, but I can put it down to like there was one thing that happened where I felt like I was then emotionally responsible for my mum.
okay.
And ever since then, all I've ever done is be aware of what everyone else was thinking or feeling and trying to look after everybody else and stuff like that. So like one of my mantras is just that I don't want anybody to feel how I have felt. And if I can do something within my power to stop that from happening, I absolutely will do. I have like it is very, very draining being that way out though, like being responsible for or feeling like I'm responsible for everybody and everything. Um so I have been like trying to reduce the sensitivity almost or not get as emotionally invested in things just for the sake of my own survival.
Hmm.
Um, so it is something that I'm working on. I'm pretty sure I'm like I mentioned in the messages, but I'm pretty sure I'm like ADD and hypersensitivity is like one of those traits. And I've been listening to, and I've just finished, I can't say his name, but he's like Gabor Mate. He does a lot of work on trauma and addiction and ADD and stuff like that. In the book I've just finished is Scattered Minds, and he's talking all about things that happen in childhood, which then give you these sort of traits and how it manifests in your life. And he talks quite a lot about hypersensitivity and feeling responsible for other people's emotions and stuff like that. And when I was listening to it, it just felt like he was describing me. Obviously, I don't have a diagnosis. I'm still waiting for one. But it was very triggering, but also it felt very safe at the same time because all you know is what you know, and you don't know if people are different or similar to you or anything like that. But when you've got somebody describing the traits and the problems and the symptoms that you've been struggling with for such a long amount of time, you're just like, oh, actually, somebody else has it, and it's not that um different, or I'm not that different, even though I've been made to feel different all of my
Hmm.
life, I guess.
Yeah.
So it's just kind of like accepting these sort of things, like I get it, that I am hypersensitive. It causes a lot of problems in my own personal life, but I'll leave that. But
I mean,
sorry, go on.
I would rather, I mean, I'd rather, I mean, I know it probably does cause some tension, but I don't know, the feeling of if I had to compare being hypersensitive to feelings rather than being sort of an emotional husk, I know which one I would choose because I've had a life without, or well, you withdraw from emotions, and it's scary. I wanted to say something. I wanted to say that in terms of friends and those you try to help and your mentor, I think it's admirable. I think those people who respect and love you will also play their part in this in terms of it takes two in any form of relationship. So those who you decide to help will understand that it can be burdensome for you in the sense of draining, and so
Mm,
they will participate in their own rescue based on your advice,
mm,
support. And those who don't appreciate you and don't have the wisdom yet will be the ones who will basically stick to you, which is the hard bit.
mm,
When you help someone, it goes from you helping them to them kind of grabbing onto you and sucking, which says something about their own insecurities and whether at this point in time you can have them within a relationship, whatever that relationship form takes. And so I would say don't feel guilty if you do have to kind of put boundaries somewhere, because um, friendship goes two ways in terms of someone supporting
mm.
you and acknowledging when you're tired, um, you know, and having that mutual respect and love. And if they don't have that, then it can be very one-sided and it can be quite selfish.
Mm. Yeah, I hear you 100%. So one thing I realized with all of this healing stuff is that my issues didn't start with men. Even going back to childhood and being in school, like I always had somebody benefit from me being smaller or feeling smaller or less secure or less pretty or all these other things. Um, so what has happened with men has just been the natural progression of the problems I didn't sort out in the first place. So before I can even consider having like another relationship or anything like that again, I needed to get my head around having a 50-50 friendship. Um, and one of my close friends now, funny story how we even met in the first place. So obviously I've had the bad relationship, but when I was 18, I was with a guy who was, oh, was he 24? So that's just red flags you can imagine. And long story short, she got hold of me a couple of years ago saying, "Oh, are you Melissa? Are you this Melissa?" And I'm like, "Yeah, what's going on?" And she was like, "Oh, did you used to date this person?" I'm like, "Yeah." She's like, "All right, can I just talk to you about it?" And long story short, she was like, "Oh, did he steal from you? Did he do this? Were he taking drugs in your house? Were he drinking and all these other things?" I'm like, "Yeah, like it all happened to me." And she'd come to me as a sort of validation that she wasn't crazy and this person was actually being quite abusive to her. And we've ended up being like really, really good friends through this.
Mm, that's
I was still in my abuse, like the worst, like abusive relationship. When she reached out, so there was kind of like a limit to that sort of friendship I could have with her because I felt like I was being a hypocrite to a certain extent because she's talking about her bad relationship in the past, and I'm in an even worse situation now.
mm,
But obviously, after I've got out of that, we are really, really, real good friends and bonded so much over growth and over healing and stuff like that. And she's the first person that I felt like I've had this 50-50 relationship with that we can put boundaries in place or we can break them down again depending on what each other needs. And yeah, it's a beautiful, beautiful thing. And it's still like a brand new concept to me, but it's also set the precedent for what I expect going forward as well.
okay.
What I've got like little rules and mantras, and like one of them is like you need to be able to love platonically before romantically. And that is one thing that I've learned through this relationship with my friend is that having the 50-50 and having consistency and things like that. And if I can get to grips with that, then I might be able to have a relationship and stuff. But obviously that's further down the line for me.
Okay.
Um, but yeah, I understand exactly what you're saying with the having somebody respect you and but yeah, just like yeah, took me back to like 'cause one of the things I realised on my reflections were actually things didn't just start with men. Things were like way back in school where somebody were always benefiting from me being smaller. Now I'm getting comfortable with being the same size as somebody else, and that's pretty cool.